Welcome to a new podcast. This podcast is called Astrology and the Search for Happiness. The human condition is a very unusual one. To really understand how unusual our condition is, let me break it down a little. At some point in time, you, me, and everyone in existence today didn't exist. Then one day, we did. Well, not really. It's sort of like we gradually faded in. Yes, we had an entrance date into life, but we can't really say that we were really here, even though we were. You understand? In other words, we kind of gradually realized that we were here. And that realization has been growing since our birth. To make matters worse, no one asked us if we wanted to be here. Absolutely no one. We were just dragged in here without consent and asked to make a go of it all, according to the rules that we mostly had no part in making. Well, it gets worse. We are judged according to these rules, and if we are found wanting, we are ostracized from society. My point in telling this story is to draw attention to how the entire process of human birth and living can be construed to infer a natural difficulty. We do not consciously get to choose anything or any of the circumstances surrounding our birth. We do not choose to be black, brown, white, short, or tall. We do not choose to be intelligent or not. We do not choose to be physiologically equipped with all the attributes we need to make better choices, to maintain positivity, to maintain excellent health and longevity. Our parents may someday have the power to decide for us on almost all of these attributes, but until that day, much of being born is akin to luck or just fate. It is this lack of choice in the most crucial decisions that shape our lives, whether to be born or not, and the circumstances surrounding that birth, that is responsible for the majority of our unhappiness as humans. This is where it all starts. So while our parents rejoice and celebrate at our births, it's kind of a great idea that we are not all there at that point, because some of us would, after examining the context of our birth, ask to be sent back to wherever it is that we came from. Yes, this is metaphorically dramatic, and it is meant to be in order to highlight the overwhelming nature of human suffering and misery in the world today. As an astrologer, it is abundantly clear that unhappiness is the major motivating factor behind most consultations. I don't mean to say that anyone who consults an astrologer is sad. No, not at all. But there exists some dissatisfaction somewhere which motivates the desire to seek clarity and further insight into their personality and psychological profile, which is strictly the best any astrologer can facilitate. So why is humanity subject to this strange set of circumstances where the decision to be born is without choice, and yet we are led to believe that how well we choose in life is what ultimately determines whether we end up being happy or not? This is the paradoxical irony of life, I guess. Human life, as it is presently constituted, is a dreary sea filled with pain, misery, and general unhappiness. From time to time, islands of happiness pop up, and the pleasure from these encounters enrich our lives to the point where we forget the general misery of life. These islands remind us of what is possible and are sufficient to convince us that such a permanent state of pleasure is indeed possible. Carried too far, the search for these islands become an end in and of themselves. However, when we objectively assess the condition of life within human nature that surrounds us, we see something totally different. We marvel at the balance of ecosystems that nature tends to achieve if left alone to itself. Yet, when we peer ever more closely, we witness the brutish logic from which these ecosystems are forged. We watch the lion hunt and devour the gazelle with a ferocity that gives the lion a fearful reputation as a beast not to be trifled with. We also see how quickly the gazelles are able to multiply, with each generation bred for faster speeds of escape. We witness these dynamic relationships in nature and dream up explanations for these processes and how they achieve the beautiful and delicate balance typical of sustainable ecosystems. Do we also see pleasure and happiness in these systems? Is the lion happy? Is the gazelle happy? Most people will respond with a resounding no. Animals are neither happy nor sad, but how can this be? We know that animals experience emotions, so it is only logical to imagine that they must experience an emotional state which we would refer to as happy. And if such a state exists, then the converse emotional state must also exist by negation of the first. So we are forced to conclude that happiness and sadness are not fixed things in themselves, but rather gradients of pleasure and displeasure. So at one extreme of this spectrum, we would find infinite happiness, characterized by infinite pleasure, and infinite unhappiness, characterized by infinite despair. These two extremes have been captured by most religions of the world to represent a heaven and a hell, and these extreme emotional states have been taught to exist in a different reality, different from this three-dimensional physical reality which all humans alive inhabit. So what exactly do we search for when we say we are in search of happiness? From the above, we begin to understand that what we as people are really after are gradients of pleasure. Astrologically, pleasure is a phenomenon associated with the planet Venus. However, Venus describes how we experience pleasure. It does not necessarily refer to the origins of such pleasures. Where Venus is in our natal chart is what we become when we experience pleasure, or how we experience pleasure, and the type of pleasure is specified by the sign Venus is in. The house position and aspects also clarify this. Easy aspects suggest that we are drawn to, receive, and experience this pleasure easily without hesitation or candor. Strained aspects suggest that we experience this pleasure in tandem with some hesitation, pain, or lesson, and this forces us to be more conscious about this aspect of our feeling nature. Venusian pleasure is predominantly sensual and linked to our body's sense organs. When taken to extremes, we experience a climax of this pleasure in the form of an orgasm. Most adults will describe this orgasmic feeling as one of ecstasy, a few moments of true transcendental experience, where we let go of all that we naturally restrain within ourselves and give in to the free flow of all that our biology is capable. An orgasm is experienced as a release. We also experience other types of pleasure, for instance, the pleasure which arises from being able to express ourselves completely and freely. This is not pleasure for pleasure's sake. This is pleasure which leads to a different state of being, which we call joy. It is the joy that comes from being able to be all that we can possibly be. It comes from finding realization in the world for that which burns within us as the desire of our ego. When we inquire of ourselves what we would like to be, it is the desire of the ego which we query. As discussed in the previous post, our ego is one manifestation of our solar mind, which is also our soul. It is a consciousness which comes from being self-aware, and its function is the ability to derive meaning from and for our existence. Astrologically, this awareness is indicated by the sun. When the sun is blocked by strained placement or aspects, the native experiences that block as a restraint on their ability to realize the desires of their ego in the physical world. This block is generally experienced as frustration, leading to melancholy and pain. It is a different type of pain though, because the effect of this pain is not initially on the physical body, but within the soul itself. It is an internal type of pain which attacks the meaning-making structure of a native life, and if left unchecked, has the ability to deprive him or her of the nourishment which joy provides to the soul. When the soul is able to realize all aspects of its potential in an unhindered and unfettered way, its joy crescendos into pure ecstasy and delight, reminiscent with a description of heaven. This is a soul-level orgasm, and it is also a form of release. Now that we know what happiness is and where it comes from, why is the majority of human experience perceived as miserable? Well, one good reason is the spread of the perception of inequity and injustice in the world. Contrary to what is generally believed as truth, most normal people suffer a certain type of pain when they see others suffering in poverty and in ill health. Most normal human beings have empathy in spades, and this comes as a normal reaction emanating from their self-consciousness. The spread of poverty and misery, often used as a tool of political propaganda, often has the opposite effect in the medium to long term on the propagandists themselves, because human psychology is not equipped to dissociate itself from empathy, that is, in normal people and not those with undiagnosed mental health issues. Obviously, most people who spread such propaganda through such means are those totally bereft of the ability to empathize, and as such, they're psychopaths, narcissists, and sociopaths. Such psychopathic people in positions of power spread misery, suffering, and pain across the world, and this infects every human consciousness that can perceive the pain and suffering of others. So, on some level, all normal people who perceive the pain of others are in many ways also in pain. This results in a very difficult to explain type of unhappiness and sadness, one which cannot be wished away. However, the greatest source of unhappiness in a human being comes from not being able to understand its origin and what exactly this origin represents. This pain and unhappiness is a collective one and is the most difficult to unravel. Very few people remain sensitive to this pain. By maturity, most people accept the world as it is in front of their eyes until death reminds them of the transient nature of life. During such moments, people are confronted with this darkness of ignorance. As a species, we do not understand death. Our scientists tell us that it is a complete cessation of brain function, but in order to experience true happiness, we as a species will have to understand exactly what death is. An unspoken assumption in astrology is that we as humans are infinite beings beyond the confines of time and space. It also assumes that we incarnate on Earth to experience a physical existence in a reality that is the densest it can possibly be, such that ignorance and choice become possible. In this way, death becomes a release from the world of choice, ignorance, and individuation. While this sounds all airy-fairy, how many of us can truly imagine ourselves this way? Those who have a strong propensity to do so are often tagged as delusional people with various degrees of imaginative disorder. My conjecture is that this dissociation occurs because we do not understand what death is, and we can only do this once we begin to understand the reality of perception without individuation. When we conquer the conviction of the idea of self beyond individuality, we conquer all fear of death. What then is self beyond the confines of individuality and of perception? Truth is, no one knows. My simple answer is that it is nothing. Yes, nothing. What kind of awareness does self as nothing possess? My answer? None. The self possesses no awareness of self, or of anything that is the result of individuation or density. The self simply is, simultaneously having no awareness of itself, and yet having total awareness of everything. It has no choice or ignorance. It knows all, and yet has no focus for this knowledge. It does not care about anything and has no needs. It has no center and no individual desires. Out of this uniformly spread out awareness, the strangest thing happens. The self begins to coalesce desire. It starts off as the most gradual of processes. Somewhere in the infinite expanse of nothing, something starts to stir with intent. A good intuitive model is how gravity is thought to gradually pull together distributed gas clouds into a central point until a star is ignited. Well, a similar thing occurs in the process of individuation. Intent begins to gather, just like how a lens can focus light to a point. As intent forms, it begins to manifest a desire. What do you imagine such an intent desires the most? Choice and limitation, and the only place choice can be found is in the world of density and ignorance. Even while a human is individualized on Earth as a self-conscious being, its awareness of itself is not complete because the gathering process continues until adulthood. Astrology was invented as a shorthand tool to aid the understanding of this gathering of self-awareness on Earth, and it focuses on the constellations and planets in the plane of the ecliptic because the gathering process starts from the edge of the universe where pure intent resides into our solar system and finally into Earth, where desire manifests as a human being capable of self-awareness. The self is a traveler but can only travel to points in space and time which are capable of supporting what it is as an individual. Think of our bodies like really advanced density suits, similar to the suits we need when we visit various other density gradients such as in the sea or in space. The self borrows intent to travel. It is not intent itself. Its existence is beyond intent. It borrows intent to coalesce into individual awareness, so as to come into physical density to experience all the things that it is not. Why? It does this because it derives pleasure from being able to negate what it is. It's the same reason why we go on holiday, because believe it or not, when you are eternal nothing, vacation involves around being temporal something. Hence, our individuality and sense of self-awareness is a temporal deviation from the nothing that we truly are, and we come into physical reality where we experience birth, maturing, unhappiness, ignorance, doubt, action, limitation, pain, sadness, energy, matter, aging, and ultimately dying. Yep, just like an a la carte vacation package. However, I have left out an important detail. It is not a vacation. It is more akin to an exile. We are forced here because we are sick. As nothing, we become infected with the desire for individual intent. And once this happens, our sickness projects the structure and existence of a physical universe into being. The physical universe is therefore a physical representation of our desire and an intent to be singular. Why else do you think we incarnate around the sun? Our sun represents the conscious desire or intent that we are enamored with. There are trillions of suns in the physical universe because there are trillions of possible intents and desires. The rehabilitation center you get sent to is the one which matches your ailment. By the time our rehabilitation is complete and we are ready to go home, it is hoped that the painful lessons of individuality have been learned to the point where we are willing to leave it behind completely and no longer have a desire for it. On a plus side, it is also hoped that not only do we reject individuality here, but that we also promote connectivity and unification before we are done with this place. If we do this properly, consistently, and absolutely, we will have no need to leave this place anymore. We will no longer need to die. This conquering of death is the greatest joy that the human vessel can experience, and within this joy is located the power to transform physical density into a place without ignorance, without pain, without sadness, and without individuality or choice, but instead to a collective hive mind with nothing but glowing ecstasy, unbridled joy, peace, and infinite contentment. Astrology and the search for happiness.